Hi everyone, welcome to this online talk with V&A Dundee. My name is Nichol Keene and I'm the creative programmer here. This talk is the second in a three-part series, Rethinking Fashion. The series brings together designers, innovators, experts to consider how to best create a sustainable future for fashion. Tonight we're joined by Phoebe English and Charles Jeffrey. Phoebe English founded an eponymous label in 2011. Rejecting mass-made or fast fashion, Phoebe English pieces are created with a close attention to detail and quality. Everything is made in London, meaning the journey from sketch to garment is minimised to roughly a 15-mile radius from her studio. Charles Jeffrey's Loverboy is a fashion house founded by Glaswegian designer, illustrator, stylist, radical creative Charles Jeffrey. Loverboy's visual identity is steeped in Jeffrey's autobiographical primary research interpreted through illustrative and a DIY approach to design. As a label born on the dance floor, a sense of event will forever be at the heart of Loverboy's output. Tonight, Phoebe and Charles are going to introduce themselves and their work, and then we will move to a discussion followed by an audience Q&A. Please note there's some nudity in some of the images that are going to be shown. Before I welcome our speakers on, I wanted to draw your attention to the Q&A function. We encourage you to ask questions throughout all of the discussion, the introductions, and when we're in conversation. You just need to use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the screen. Details on how to use this have been posted in the chat. So without further ado, I would like to invite Charles and Phoebe to turn their video and audio on so they can join us. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you again. I know that one of the things that we were keen to discuss in our pre-chat was Phoebe's approach to sustainability through kind of zero waste pattern cutting and material sources. So I thought the first thing that I could do is share some of those images if you and Phoebe and Charles would like to discuss them and talk through them and kind of find out a bit more about that, if that's all right.
Sure. I mean, I'm like really keen to just like, no, I'm going to be a bit of a geek here and like take notes. I feel like I'm going to be in like a cultural studies class because it's like a really interesting way of working. Like, isn't it just basically like you're taking like one piece of fabric and completely transforming it into a garment without any waste at all?
Yes, so that's the idea. I'm really excited that you're interested about this because I sometimes like it's really technical and slow, and yeah, it's probably about 3 times slower than doing normal pattern cutting. So I'm pleased that people are interested in it. So yeah, should I talk about this image?
Yeah, you just let me know when you want me to flick on.
Yeah, so I wanted to share this because this is the first trial I ever did of working in this way. And I guess zero waste pattern cutting, like, I guess it's a way to respect the fabric and the processes have gone into making it. So, you know, the farming, the dyeing and all those things. So when you're working them out, it's kind of a case of really thinking about the source. So you know, if you, for example, bought like a really carefully sourced, beautiful organic cotton, you want to make sure that none of that is going to waste because the farmers have put in extra effort and extra financial cost to make it. The dyers have put in extra processes to the dye out of polluting rivers and all those things. So it's kind of about really respecting the source.
Mm-hmm.
So this skirt is a single piece of fabric. I guess it's a bit like a kilt, Charles.
Mm-hmm. J'adore a kilt.
Thinking about Scotland, you know, like those beautiful kilts would have been made with really gorgeous wool yarns that would have taken the sheep a whole year to grow, and you know that particular garment would have been made in respect to the raw material it was made from, trying to like keep every single centimetre of it. So this same idea, this was kind of a modern, trying to do a modern kilt, so it was like a deconstructed pleating that we did, where the pleats kind of fold in on themselves, and it's made using the entire width of fabric. It's a very long strip of fabric, like exactly how you make a kilt. And we had to find, in order to do it, we had to find something that had a really neat salvage. Sometimes fabric comes with like a really hairy salvage, or a salvage with loads of writing on it. So this was about trying to find a fabric that already had a nice salvage. And it's really about finding a material, you know, understanding, respecting the processes that have gone into making it, and then responding to that material directly. So it's just a long piece of fabric, and I've got this really complicated pleated folding that goes all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
It was really popular, but it caused a lot of problems in the production stage because the pleating was really complex. And they're just literally tacked on, so it's a really simple kind of construction, but it's really a case of draping rather than cutting. If that makes sense.
Well, I think like the narrative behind that whole you know, reason for, you know, making a garment with zero waste pattern cutting, I think is just like so integral, and I think is a really great talking point. You know, the fact that like there is so much time and effort put into, you know, making a fabric. I mean, I went to a fabric mill quite early on in my career as part of like the Wool Mark project. It was like a kind of little video that I had to do, and learning how, you know, wool is spun, and, you know, the amount of laborious tasks that have to happen in order to make the fabric just shop ready. You know, like checking to see if there's any like problems within the weave and all of that. And I just think, you know, that for me was really eye-opening, and like how many hands have touched the fabric in order to kind of give it to, you know, a space in which it can be made into a piece of clothing. And I think, you know, I love that real kind of meditative way that you're working, in which, you know, you're sort of like thinking about all of those things and applying the same amount of energy into that as well, and considering it. It's kind of like a very kind of Buddhist way, and, you know, it's like respecting. It's like really nice, and I think, you know, I think for me that's like a really like amazing touching point, and it's actually really inspiring. That's why I'm really keen to know about it. And it's not just like the technical side behind it, but it's also like the kind of, you know, just really mindful, and it's just taking a bit of a step back. You know, like it's so easy for all of us when we're in the studio. I mean, I'm guilty of it. You know, we keep all of our scraps because we always find a way to make some sort of like, you know, accessory, or we make dolls, or, you know, we kind of find a way to always like reuse it for toiling. So we really rarely throw away scraps of fabric. But, you know, you do kind of think about like lay plans and all of that. Like, it's just like, it's, you have to be so, like, some people are just like, they've just got reams and reams and they just don't even think about it. And it's like, you do forget the amount of work and time that's gone into making a piece of fabric.
I think you're right. Like, I think as designers, we're really removed from the raw product, the raw material that we use, and its sourcing. I know we both do a lot of work in education, but I think if I was in charge of all fashion education, I think I would make everyone on their first day of fashion school go to a farm, so go to the source, and then also go to the destination, which is unfortunately often landfills. So I think I'd make everyone go to a landfill site and a farm on the same day, just to kind of like get their mind into like the source and destination. I think it's a really good, it's where we kind of begin our thinking now. The source and destination is always like the bedrock of our design decision making.
Totally. There's putting a face to it. It's the same as like, you know, eating meat. You know, if you choose to eat meat, then it's also about important to know where that meat comes from, and seeing it from, you know, birth to death, or, you know, how it's used, how it's farmed. I mean, it's the same concept. And I think that, you know, with something like clothing, I think, you know, over the last 10, 15 years, we've been kind of ingrained to understand that clothing is such a throwaway thing. I mean, one of the biggest uphill battles that I have as a brand is, you know, trying to make the clothing, you know, an appropriate price point for my demographic, or for, you know, the fans of the brand. And it's difficult because clothes cost a lot of money to make, and because it's a craft. It's like, you know, to build a piece of clothing from scratch, it takes, you know, a number of people. It takes a lot of time. You know, and people just think that there's two levels. There's fast fashion, there's couture, and then there's kind of everything in between. But like, I think, as you're saying, if you kind of educate people on, you know, on an education front, you know, within fashion education, but also like within the wider, you know, public, about where things come from and how things are processed, people would be more inclined to kind of, you know, wear a jumper in a different way, or put on a jacket in a different way, or even see how, you know, a jacket at the cost that it is within a store like Zara or something, and just be like, why is it that cheap? That is completely sidestepping so many people. I mean, you know, we're going into a different kind of topic to a certain extent. Well, I don't know if we are, but, you know, it's really, I think for me, like, this process that you've explained is a really it's like understanding how breathing can really calm you down. You know, it's like, it's kind of within that same thing. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, oh, you know, realizing that there is so much power to fabric and just kind of being mindful, you know, feeling the fabric, knowing that there's so much processes have gone into it, and actually looking at the beauty of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, you know, there is a lot of value that we miss culturally at the moment. And I think often about both my grandmothers, you know, their relationship to clothes were completely different to my sister's, you know, relationship with clothes. They had not very many clothes. Everything was like really careful. It was repaired, really loved, and, you know, worn really carefully. And, you know, my sister and I grew up in the 90s, and, you know, there was New Look, and there was all cheap fashion everywhere, and you know, we had a lot of clothes and we didn't care about them and we didn't look after them. You know, just in that generational gap, there's such a vast like difference between like the approaches, relationships and values that those two generations had on clothes. So I think for me it's been about like trying to reevaluate, you know, those elements in terms of trying to respect them more and understand them more and value them more ultimately, and then that works into the design.
Definitely. Oh, my audio down. I'm sorry, I just turned my audio down slightly.
No worries, we're just getting a little echo from Phoebe. I think if you just turn your sound down, that will help. Phoebe, shall I just
Is that a bit better?
Phoebe, do you want to have a chat and then
Sorry, what was the question?
Oh yeah,
is that a bit better sound?
That's definitely
was it my sound that was?
No, I think it was an echo coming in from someone else's microphone.
Okay.
Shall I just flick through some of these and you can talk through them as you want to?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is, you can see a little bit more the pleating, and you can flick on, and then the following. So this was kind of leading on from that idea. So this is like a slightly more technical. So this is again using the pleating. So again, using the whole width, the whole length of the fabric, and using half the width, finding a fabric that already had a nice selvage, and then kind of pleating it together with fewer pleats, but then using the crotch, when you cut out the crotch on the pattern, taking those out cuts and designing them so they're a shape that you can then take them and sew them together into a pocket. So you can see on the central image there's a pocket attached at the back. So that's actually just a cut out of the crotch. So it's just a big long rectangle pleated around with one, you know, cut out, which is then taken and patch pocketed onto the back. So it's a super simple idea. And I think some of these things are about literally like stripping it down. It's just, I know obviously our work is so different. Mine is so like simple, and yours is so amazingly beautiful.
Oh my God, yours is amazingly beautiful.
But yeah, I guess with these techniques, it's so complicated to do the zero waste pattern cutting that when I was starting, this was the second one that we worked on. It was just about doing it really simply. But then obviously we have to sell them in a slightly different way, because obviously when you sell clothes, you sell them in different sizes for different bodies. So obviously with this, you can't change the length of it because the fabric's only a specific width. So then you have to make sure you're explaining that, you know, if you buy it a size bigger, it will still be the same length as this size. So, you know, it's about also kind of educating the people we sell to and the people that buy our pieces about why certain features are the way they are. So yeah, that's this piece.
I love that. You can call it like a crotch pocket.
Yeah, it is. I had never thought of it. It's a crotch patch pocket.
It is a crotch patch pocket.
Crotch patch pocket.
Scratch, patch. I can't say that at all. These are some examples of our reuse of studio waste. So as Charles was mentioning, we don't get rid of any of our fabric scraps at all either. And I'm a textile designer, so often we're trying to rework those scraps into new textiles. So this is a quilted textile that we did and made into a jacket and a coat. So it's all articulated, and it's lots of little strips, and they're all sort of squashed in like a sandwich. So yeah, I mean, and these are some other, this is kind of a combination of zero waste pattern cutting and reuse of textile waste. So we ask our manufacturers when they're producing all of our production to return our waste to us so we can put it back into the next collection. So trying to kind of attain some kind of circularity in how we're running things. So the piece on the left, again, is a really simple, really rudimentary pattern. I'm not a very good pattern cutter at all. I'm obviously a textile person, not a pattern cutting person, and I work with an amazing pattern cutter called Nichol. But this piece is literally like a handkerchief dress. So it's just big, big squares. And then they're just draped on the stand. And then they have these little triangles, which are just squares folded in half. So the main thing with zero waste pattern cutting is as soon as you put in a curve, so for example, if you're cutting like a sleeve head out or a neck hole, you know, then you start getting waste, because any curve is really hard to kind of fit back into the pattern. So we found that, like, as long as we do straight edges, you know, that can always sit edge to edge, it works more efficiently. So, you know, with the squares that are turned into triangles here, we would make the squares, you know, I wouldn't just draw a picture of the triangle and be like, that's the size the triangle is going to be. I would divide it along the width of the fabric, and the triangle would have to be how big that is, if that makes sense. So it's really like the process informs the design, if that makes sense. So it's kind of doing everything backwards rather than drawing a picture and making a picture.
So do you ever do any sketches for these designs, or is it just very much about like what can the fabric do, or do you have, I guess, like an intention of the garment? Obviously you're like, I'm going to do a dress this time, or, you know, for example, like those little flirty dragon tail aspects, do those like have any, were you mindful of that before approaching it, or was it based on the outcome that the fabric gave you?
Yeah, so sometimes it's, sometimes I just see it in my mind at like 3 in the morning in the middle of the night, and it'll all kind of come out in a 3-dimensional way, and then I'll slice it back in and lay it onto the fabric in my head, and it will kind of come about that way. But obviously we found, like, as we were trying to develop this way of working, that the straight lines work really well, in a really efficient way of just easily lining everything up so there's no gaps. So I'm just always thinking of straight lines, you know, straight lines, and then I'm obviously like a square folded in half is a triangle, so then trying to work out how to implement triangle, and then with the drape you need weight, so the triangle adds weight to the drape and it makes it hang in a nice way. So yeah, it's kind of, we do I'll often see the process in my head, then I'll sketch it out, and it might not necessarily be in a shape, it might just be a design detail, like, you know, I could get a collar if I had a flat bit here, and then I inserted a triangle which is half of a square which can match up against the edges, and then I might draw that, and then that would go on and be developed through the toiling process. But I don't often draw like a whole silhouette, that's not something I usually do.
But I think that's super interesting, because I think, you know, there's so many traditional ways of working now that people, and there's so many people like approaching fashion design and, you know, going through the kind of like education process, and I think, you know, having a new way of working that is super authentic, and, you know, the outcomes come out of the problem solving and the kind of geometrics, as you're talking, you know, like the relationship between lines, you know, for me that just is such an amazing example of like a gateway for new work, you know, things that have never really been done before, because ultimately, like, you could say that, like, you know, obviously everybody's influenced by things, and people have like taste levels influenced by other designs, but like you can confidently say that no one else has come up with that design before, because it's completely unique to a problem that you've solved with, you know, geometrics and mathematics, which in turn is you know, really amazing if you think about it. Like, it is new fashion, you know, it's everyone's like, oh, every idea has been done before. I mean, yes, you could say that zero pattern cutting is an idea that people have practiced before, but the outcomes that you've made from it are completely unique to you, which is, you know, gold, really.
Oh, thanks, Charles.
You're making gold, Phoebe.
Well, we have, you know, I'm not, like, I do have a team to help me, as I know you do as well, and I'm not the most technical person in pattern cutting, and pieces like this piece here, this is something that, you know, I would need support with. So figuring out this neckline, obviously this is a curve's really hard to get rid of. So what Natalia developed is if you have your flat fabric and you cut a curve like a smiley face in the middle of the fabric, and then you flap it over and cut down the middle to make a little slit at the back. You then have like a curved neckline in the front, and then you have a back opening that opens, and then you just finish it with a binding, and that's a zero waste neckline. But that's something, you know, that took us weeks and weeks just to get that neckline, and that really came from her neckline knowledge and stuff like that, because stuff like shoulder fit and all that stuff is beyond my skill set for. And then obviously like the sleeve heads are all just flat edged sleeve heads, and they don't have like a set in shaping, and then obviously I've done this pinch draping on top of it. And then it's also, we've been like approaching fit differently. So obviously our bodies change shape all throughout our lives. And, you know, we've been trying to work out how, as a design team, we can help clothes last longer. So often we use quite fragile fabric. We don't use like heavy outerwear, utilitarian fabric for kind of strong jackets and stuff. We often use quite delicate fabrics. So obviously they're not going to last hundreds and hundreds of years, but how can we make sure that garment like lives with someone longer and they don't get rid of it? So we've started doing much more flexible fits. So we don't do any fitted fits anymore. We'll only do a garment that can work between several different sizes that you could have now, or you could have a bit later when you're older and might be a different shape. So just trying to kind of factor that in as well, to see if we can get our pieces from the design stage to kind of live with people for a longer amount of time. So this skirt is an example of that. It's like got a huge waistband with a drawstring. We do a lot of drawstring, loose kind of boxy shapes that can work on with people for a longer amount of time, hopefully.
Pre and post Christmas.
100%.
That was such a bad joke, sorry.
This is curves, but these are interlocking curves. So you cut the fabric up and then you put it back together and it gets this nice undulating broken surfaces. So it's just like loads of wiggles, and these are based on worry lines. This was a collection we showed in February. Everything was getting a bit worrying. So yeah, this is the worry line collection, these kind of wiggly worried lines that kind of slot together. So it's just literally consecutive lines cut along the fabric at full width. And they're bagged out and then they're all quilted back together.
It's beautiful.
So yeah, those are some of our ideas. And this is again reuse of waste. So this is like another stage on a few seasons later from the other quilted jackets. So this is using our fabric waste as a stuffing. We did loads of bamboo silk pieces, and then obviously as the factories return all of our scraps, we try and find things to do with it, and we shredded it and made it into a stuffing for the jacket. And then all the jacket and the culottes are made from reclaimed fabrics from different studios around London. So just
did we manage to get fabric too?
Yeah,
Remember when you did?
You did. So yeah, we did some fabric sourcing, we were obviously trying to keep things so we're not having to fly things everywhere. And we were like, can we make a whole collection just from fabric that's already in London? And Charles's studio very kindly sent us some fabric for that project. But yeah, that's a piece from that project.
Oh, nice. I remember getting the email. I was like, guys, we have to do this. This is such a nice
thing. It feels like a lifetime ago now.
I know.
God. So much has happened since then.
I know we've got some slides for Charles as well, but I just had one question to jump into for Phoebe before we move on to your slides, Charles.
Yeah, of course.
We talked a lot about kind of the scale of production and the pace of production and consumption, and making sure that garments are with consumers for longer. And I think what's interesting to elaborate on is kind of how you've really restructured your own business model to be able to support that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think we it was like a 2-year transition, and then those images I just showed you were the kind of, I guess, the kind of culmination of 2 years of work of trying to get to transition from using new fabrics to nothing new. So no virgin resources, nothing new, basically, which was the name of the collection. Just in respect to how much waste is produced in the industry, and just, I guess, to see if it was possible. You know, we're a very small team, we're a very small business, and which has a lot of drawbacks, but it also means we're super agile. So if we want to try and do something just from reclaimed surplus waste, then we can. So we should. So that was kind of the thinking behind that, and we rewrote our whole company ethos and did a lot of research to kind of try and, especially into like materials, to try and find out how we could be as least impactful as possible. And the idea was really for it to be to be completely imperceivable, so not to be able to not see the difference before and after. The work just needed to remain completely the same. So like, as you can see in all those images, you can not perceive any hours and hours and hours of zero waste figuring out, you know, it's just got to be like a really imperceivable difference. The product had to still be the same, the design had to be the same, the ethos was entirely different, but it needed to look imperceivably different, if that makes sense.
Definitely. I think the kind of really fun, interesting thing that you commented on was getting Charles to kind of give you some material waste for one of the collections. And I think that really touches on some stuff that we kind of talked about in our pre-chat with Charles and community and networks, and that being like really vital to your kind of way of working and how that connects to the kind of ethos border of sustainability in the industry. So I think if I just bring up your slides, maybe you can talk through those and talk a little bit about those kind of elements in them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, just as a bit of a precursor to it, like we released a sort of, I guess, maybe a manifesto or a sort of statement intent back in January when we did our show Hell Menju at the beginning of the year, and you know, it was basically discussing that we're nowhere where we want to be in terms of sustainability, but we understand that it is something that is a bit of a spectrum. You know, there's lots of ways in which, you know, we can begin to start working and putting seeds, you know, planting seeds within the company structure, and how we can kind of, you know, begin to become more sustainable in terms of like fabric sourcing and kind of all of the work that Phoebe is doing, you know, kind of taking steps to become closer and closer to that. But, you know, for one thing, when we were doing this sustainability course with Caring, it was kind of like an audio-based course. We kind of did it every Friday for about 8 weeks. And it was, you know, discussing the idea of sustainability being something that also is to do with, you know, diversity within, you know, and inclusivity, and it being a kind of wider topic than just kind of about, I guess, recycling plastic and, you know, all of that type of stuff. So I think, having said that, you know, one thing that I would say that our work has always been about, and authentically been about, whether it was something I kind of mindfully doing it or not, was always about sort of community and bringing people together for you know, a delivery of something joyful, whether it has like a dark aesthetic or a bright aesthetic like this particular collection does. And, you know, I think that there's something really important about that with, you know, building a brand, or, you know, running a fashion label, or doing any form of artwork or any kind of business at all. I think it's always about kind of like the community, and, you know, that can be something as small as your studio team, or it can be people that you kind of have around you that you collaborate with. And I think we came from a queer club space where it was just a bunch of like-minded people trying to find a space for themselves to feel comfortable and to authentically show who they are. And it was so crazy how, when we first started, obviously it was just a very small thing. It was my birthday party, the club night, Loverboy. And then it turned into this thing where there was just these amazing, you know, people who, I've never seen anything like that before. You see it in movies or documentaries, maybe from like the 80s or something else, where like there was these, it's like give people a space to express themselves, and they will come and they will express themselves. And I think then turning my club night into like a fashion business, it was always so integral for me to like build a space with the work, or the delivery of the work, to be, you know, somewhere where people could feel you know, the energy always had to be about people just being happy and joyful and full of love. And, you know, I think this particular collection that we've released under the constraints of COVID, called The Healing, I think is a prime example of that, in the fact that, you know, it's a series of images shot by my friend, who happens to be Tim Walker, who's obviously an amazing photographer. But, you know, this shoot was an amazing 2 days, and it was just a bunch of, like, you know, people that all knew each other, and we're all doing amazing things, and we're all kind of within this sort of like world, this sort of queer space. And, you know, it was a real kind of like, for me, it was a real amazing release. I think it was one of the collections that kind of like, you know, you didn't get the release of a show potentially. It wasn't like that whole thing of, you know, at the end of the day and just be like, oh my God, I can't believe that's over, you know, after the kind of like, you know, the catwalk show. But it was like, you know, when releasing these images into the public, it was almost like a much more softer, calmer thing, and then just sort of seeing it rumble online, like that was so amazing. And I think, yeah, I'm really sort of grateful with the response to it. But to talk through the images, I mean, we sort of start, I mean, there's a lot of expression, which is very authentic to the community that I come from, the queer community, LGBTQIA+, as we like to call ourselves. You know, there's a lot of, you know, craft here, like some of the projects, some of the pieces that you see here, like, for example, the image on the left is a project that we set one of our interns. So we had this whole intern project. So basically our interns weren't able to work with us. And for me, I love having interns. Are like, you know, they're kind of like these little chicks that we nurture for a season, and they get to contribute. It's really important for me that they contribute towards the show. Again, this whole idea of like building a space where people can kind of express themselves and validating, you know, their expressions. And so they weren't able to do that within the studio space, and I felt really awful about that. So, you know, I set each intern a little craft project. So we had knitters, and then we had, like, you know, the sort of ready to wear interns, or the fashion interns, whatever. And the knitters did a crochet project. So we had a lot of research that was based off of kind of poisonous animals, animals that were kind of bright to sort of signal warding people off. So kind of in relation to this idea of like COVID at the very beginning, everyone was terrified of each other. And I was kind of thinking, like, what clothes would you wear in order to kind of tell somebody to kind of stay away, but then also it be something that could kind of lure you back in again. So the inspiration behind a lot of the markings and symbolism and all of that was all based on kind of like warning signs within nature, and yeah, sort of translated through these kind of projects. So this crochet project, Kristen, I think, spent 3 months doing this, just like knitting away. And
amazing, so beautiful.
Yeah, it's just so
beautiful.
Full of like love and life, and, you know.
Well, I think that what we were talking about yesterday, about what I'm just like so obsessed with your work, is that, I mean, like the first time, like, because Charles and I sometimes are in the same showroom, and that's kind of the first place where I kind of experienced your work, even though I think we had met each other a little bit before. But yeah, it's just everything, every centimeter of every clothes that you do, it just has this like amazing base of love in it. And I just really, what I love about your work is this incredible sense of love. I'm underneath everything.
Thank you.
So beautiful, really.
Well,
really
thank you so much. I mean, I think it's one of those things, like the word authenticity always comes up within, you know, whether I'm teaching or I guess doing interviews, and I guess explaining my work. And I think that there always, for me, has to be, it's like we can't just make a product for product's sake or for sales sake. Like everything does have to have this element of authenticity throughout it, whether it's coming from, you know, an artwork made manifest project that comes from myself, or something that we set, you know, the interns, or, you know, I just think that I think one of the reasons why we have been able to sustain ourselves throughout this whole process is, I think, just continuing to try and express ourselves as authentically as possible. But,
I
you know,
feel
drawing...
like this project has been like this beautiful culmination of everyone, because obviously with your work is about being together, like it's a brand based on people being in the same room at the same time, like at capacity, like that's the foundation of your work. And I was really like, how is it, I was trying to like picture how because with me, I've struggled so much with being away from my team family, like your work family are really
Mm-hmm.
important to what you do, and I really struggled with that. And I just feel like for a brand that's based on people being in the same room at the same time, you still manage to make everyone come together, and with this really strong baseline of love and celebration and joy and kindness. And yeah, I'm just a huge fan of this.
Oh, thank you. You're crying a minute, like I'm
Like,
just like,
because it's so hard being separated from each other, and the people you love and the people you're excited by and the people you want to be with, and that give you strength and energy and power. And I still feel like you've given so much out and still brought people together, even though we are all separated through this work. And I'm so excited by it, and I think you should be really proud of it.
Oh, thank you. I think that that's the kind of power of like the fashion image, you know. I think that it really does, it can just provide so much for people. And I think, you know, we are succumbed to it so much every day, and we digest images so much every day. And I think, you know, the outcome of this project was like a printed object. And I think for me, the idea was it's something that instead of it just being something that would be posted online and then digested, like I love the idea of people being able to like purchase it and have it and look at it and then look back at it. Like I know I have that same thing with like magazines that I've still kept from when I was like 16, and I used to hide them all under my bed, you know. And you know, you go back to sort of editorials and or images, and they can really make you feel something. And I think I wanted to sort of like put that out, and you know, it was a logistical challenge getting people to come in and making sure it was all safe, and you know, making sure that we still were able to provide that level of energy throughout every look and everything. But I just think, again, it's like when it's like thinking about the club night, you know, back into this idea of community being something that can really provide, you know, authentic expression, is that, you know, we didn't have any money when we first started. We had literally no money, and we had, you know, this little kind of basement that we would go to once a month and decorate, and like we just found different ways of decorating it. Like one time we got like bags of sawdust and poured it all on the floor and then like put like plastic gloves on the ceiling and painted them, and you know, it was like trying to find all these new ways of kind of like making an environment. And I think that you know, people want to come together to make something that provides joy or provides some sort of positivity. You know, I think that's why people like to get together to dance. It's such a human thing. And, you know, that's one thing that I've really missed and noticed being a real lack of, is like people dancing. It's such a human action. I think if you can provide some form of imagery that maybe promotes or makes you think about that, like I think that's what I wanted to do. I think that's why the colors are so zingy. It's like they're kind of like dancing on the page, and it's like I can't go to my favorite club, close my eyes and just like flinging myself around for a couple of hours, you know, but I can try and make work that represents what I would maybe see or think about when in that space. So I think it's trying to kind of communicate, I guess, something very kind of sort of visceral and cerebral. On the right is an example of the interns project, which was the embroidery project that the kind of ready to wear interns did. So I did 3 hope suits, which were based off of the Buryman, which is like a Scottish folkloric costume, which is covered in brambles, and then like in the middle of it is the Scottish flag. I can't quite remember where it's based. Maybe someone later will tell us in the audience, but the inspiration was to do like our own version of a folkloric costume for this time during COVID. So I drew all these panels, like these A3 panels, and then sent the interns like scraps of fabric that we had in the studio, and then they had some images that were based off of like stitches that were found in the Buryman's costume. And then they constructed these 3 hope suits, and this one here is for community, because we named them Hope, Health and Community. So they're kind of like 3 beacons, like they're apotropaic, they're supposed to like ward off evil. But it was again trying to like...
So can you walk me through some of the imagery? I'm so intrigued by the beautiful shapes.
So this again on the hope suit.
Yeah.
So I mean, for me, like I guess like my artwork has always been steeped in semiotics and symbolism, and I think I always kind of like to draw very primitively. Because I think it feels like a real... I don't like to spend too much time on a drawing. It's always like super quick, and I think there's something about being very immediate and reactive to a current moment, which I think is a sort of technique for me to sort of be present. So like all of the work kind of carries all of these symbols that I guess I kind of always regurgitate. So there's loads of gender symbols, Scottish Pictish symbols. I adore like the Picts, and I always like use like references to their kind of like markings that they used to do in stone. And then just like really sort of instinctive panels. I think I did all of these like pictures in about like an hour. I was just super like just getting it out. And I think there's something in that kind of immediacy. I think that's what's quite interesting about our work, is that there's like two kind of energy levels. I feel mine is very kind of like of a moment and like quite sparky, but and yours is very mindful.
Laboured and slow.
Yeah, but like, isn't that like amazing? Because I mean, for me, like I adore your work because it kind of allows me to kind of take a breath.
Well, I know that's why I'm so excited about doing this talk with you, because when we're in the showroom, as we were saying the other day, you know, it's like a long 10 days, and like you're there at 8 and then you're still there at 9 at night every day, and it can be really downhearting, and you're already tired from doing the show, and you know, we always get put really closely together.
Yeah, always right next to each other.
Yeah, and I think it's because our work is just so different. It doesn't crowd each other out, and it doesn't, you know, like it kind of like balances itself really, because they're so different. But I just love like by day 5, I'm just like all coming over to your rails, and just like Austin, like just coming over for just to take some child's energy in, and then like go away again, and then come back again. Just like it's like a breath of like joy and energy. And I think, you know, like talking about the word sustainability, and you know how layered and how multi meanings it has, and you know, there's something specifically about this time in history, you know, there's really something about sustaining hope and sustaining joy and sustaining energy and sustaining a sense of togetherness, which I feel like this project really did. It's like it's sustained, when I look at it, it sustains a joy in me, and it sustains a hope in me. And you know, it's like it's like touching something, even though we can't touch anything at the moment. Yeah.
No, well, I mean, that relates to the concept, that idea of like, you know, whether you can touch something or not, you know, it's bright, it's inviting, and then like it's also like a warning signal. I mean, these are all things that we were kind of like thinking about, but I think there was just something about there's like so many photos. I think there's like 64 images in total that we took over the space of like 2 days, and you know, we did lots of kind of provocative shots. We kind of did like sexy and inverted commas for the first time. You know, we worked with people who were super proud of their bodies and wanted to expose themselves, and that was part of their artistry. You know, Luke on the right hand side, you know, his Instagram is just like an explosion of self-expression with his own body, and I just think that's just so you know, refreshing. And for somebody who doesn't do that myself, it was just really interesting to sort of challenge how my clothing, which usually always is based upon stuff that I, you know, my own persona to a certain extent, is autobiographical in a way. You know, it's so interesting to put it on people who would wear it in a way that I would never wear it. And I think that was just like nice to create these little pockets of friction, of like expectations of what you might see these things in. And you know, I think again, this whole idea of like courting and displaying yourself to people as well during a time where you can't actually maybe engage. You know, there's something within the gay community as well, this idea of like peacocking and showing yourself, and not being able to kind of go and copulate, for lack of a better word, but you know, like, you know, there's some, I just thought that like these are all real authentic things that are within the community that I'm within. And I think instead of just putting a lick of paint on it and doing some sort of fabulous rococo sort of situation that, you know, some people do, it's like these are all real pockets of people, but it's just, you know, with an element of warmth within your belly. Do you know what I mean? It's like all these different pockets of experience. And I think that one of this collection has just been, I've had so many messages from people, like more than I ever have, like with the catwalk show, of people just being saying, oh, thank you for, you know, putting this out there. It's like, you know, it's really kind of lifted up my day. And it's funny how literally, because it is just in Tim's studio, it's this tiny little, you know, shed thing. Well, it's not shed, it's like a nice house, but it's like got like the studio is like the kind of attic of it, and just creating these creatures for the you know, for 2 days to sort of exist and just express themselves in this kind of really kind of strict environment that we had to create because of COVID was just I don't know, it was just really refreshing. And I think, yeah, the energy, I think there's something about, as you were saying, this, you know, with your work, with this idea of being mindful of the energy that's within the fabric and being respectful to that. I think that, you know, you can feel that even when you're describing the way that your skirt and the kilt is made, and how the dress and everything is sort of like coming from something that, if I would wear that, I would just feel so mindful and, you know, present. And I think that's a transferring of energy. And I think, you know, with the work that we do, it is always about a transferal of energy. And I think on the day that we were doing this, all of the energy that you're feeling from the images was definitely the energy that we had on the day. It wasn't like a forced
you
thing.
can absolutely feel it. It just like vibrates off, well, I'm going to say page, but it's obviously everything's a screen now, but it really does like resonate out of the screen like a kind of electric warmth. It's really renewing and beautiful. I keep saying beautiful, but I'm a mega fan, so
thank you. But I guess, you know, thinking about these ideas of you know, I guess again going back to this idea of like doing something in print, you know, obviously doing a show can cost so much money, and it requires a lot of energy from a lot of people, and, you know, there's a lot of waste that's involved in a show. And it was something that I was super being celebrated for, was doing these huge shows. And the last one we did was this huge event, but, you know, there was a lot of waste that happened with that event. And, you know, going through COVID and obviously restructuring how we would kind of have an output for the business, what our output would be, you know, thinking about, Christ, you know, we do, you know, put so much money into something, and obviously it is super it is rewarding doing events and things like that, but just like the fact that we just did something really considered, it was a printed material, it's more permanent, people can go back to it, it's less like ephemeral and throwaway, it's like a moment that people can kind of like explore again. And I think that that's something that as a takeaway is something that I'd like to express for, because it hasn't stopped us with sales, it hasn't stopped us with, you know, being able to reach the people that we want to reach. It's just a bit more of a I don't know, it's just a bit more of a mindful way of working in our own way, I guess. But thinking about these people that we brought together, you know, Ibrahim on the left came, you know, he was somebody that I met on the dance floor before COVID, and we managed to get him to come to the shoot. And then James is somebody that I was put in touch with by a friend who is a careers advisor. You know, he wasn't somebody that you might find at one of our parties or, you know, mixing with our friendship group, but, you know, he had the same ideas and need for lifting people up. You know, he's a careers advisor, he's supposed to inspire young high school students, this guy here. And, you know, there was something about him being in that space amongst a bunch of kind of like queers putting on makeup and dressing up, and he was just so happy in that picture that he's got there.
He
was so happy.
The
He
joy
does look really
is
happy.
just infectious.
Yeah, and
What
it's just
a
again
beautiful
bringing
person.
somebody in from another community and but yet still sharing ideas. And it's like this whole idea that we don't have to separate ourselves from, obviously the queer community does stick together and we all do, but, you know, we are still part of the same, we're all part of the same family, do you know what I mean? And it's like, it just goes to show you that, like, when you make something like that's focused on joy, you can bring everybody in and it's valid.
Yeah, it's absolutely it's so beautiful, Charles.
So yeah, I mean, this is about 64 images here.
I think we're about to the end of the slides now. So I have, I'm going to stop sharing them now because I think we've got a few other questions to run through. I know that we've talked about, because I know, Phoebe, you started this Fashion on Earth WhatsApp group, which was kind of about network and about community and about sharing ideas about sustainability. And I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience of being involved in that and the positives and negatives of making that space to learn, and kind of how it's grown and changed and what you see as being good about it or bad about it. And Charles, I know you're on it as well and have seen it grow and how that's worked. And I think, you know, definitely both of you have brought out in your discussions about your work that the community you surround yourself with are really really vital to the way that you work. They keep you accountable, they teach you stuff. And yeah, I think maybe if we move to talking a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So at the beginning of my thinking, you know, I need to change how I'm working and how I'm doing materials and how I'm using them. I realized I didn't know anything, and I didn't know anyone that could tell me anything, and I was just starting from scratch. And I remember standing in the car park outside the studio and just thinking, oh, I just really wish I was a fly and I could just fly into, I don't know, the Stella McCartney studio, or I could just fly into the Vivian Westwood studio and I could just watch and hear all the information so I can know where to start, because I just don't even know where to start. And you know, I started talking to more people and introducing myself and trying to teach myself and learn about materials and about it as a subject, and because I really didn't know where to begin. It's a huge, multi-layered, massive subject, and it's really daunting to know where to even start with it. So I knew a few people, you know, there was some St. Martin's graduates and a few small London designers that were also trying to work in this way, and Sam from Charles's team came to the studio and we were all sort of talking. And then I thought, you know, we're in a really urgent situation. The fashion industry is contributing huge amounts of waste, huge amount of damage to our waterways, to our oceans, through the use of microplastics in our fibers and through chemicals, awful, really terrible chemicals in some of our dyes, and pesticides on our cottons, and all the traveling everything does. You know, it you know, as an industry we contribute a huge amount to climate change. It's a huge percentage, and you know, this is quite an urgent situation. Me trying to figure out these things on my own is really inefficient in regards to how much time we actually have to not only mitigate the results of the climate crisis, but also to start working backwards and bouncing back from it. So we really need to be working as a whole industry. So we need to start talking to each other, because if we're talking to each other, then we can share ideas and we can share solutions, which is most important. So I said, you know, let's just be in a WhatsApp group, and then when we have a solution, or when we have a good fabric supplier, we can just share it. Because if we have this information, it should belong to everybody. Which was great, people were sharing, and it suddenly got more and more well known and more popular, and more people in it. And suddenly it was people from America, from Europe, LA. There was suddenly world famous sustainability consultants in there, press, famous people, all sorts of people, and as well as recent graduates and students, and it's just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's really big. So, and that's great, because lots of people are talking about it, and lots of people are finding solutions and finding different ways to work. And the idea is really to always try and get this type of practice as just part of general practice, not having this is my sustainability USP and it's part of my company policy or whatever. It's just about it being general practice and especially part of general fashion education, because we can't be empowered if we don't have the knowledge. So it was about knowledge sharing, but it wasn't really a thing I was starting. It's not something I kind of put on our website or encourage people to join. It's just something that's really, really snowballed. And now it's a huge thing. And because, it's a space, it's, the idea was to connect people and make it open, but actually a WhatsApp group is always fundamentally a closed space. Even though you're connected, it's still a closed room. So as a kind of exercise of connecting people, it did to some degree work, and it has been helpful, but it also does, unfortunately, because it's a WhatsApp group space, it's fundamentally closed, which I feel quite uncomfortable about, and it means it doesn't function as well as it could do because it's not open and public. So we've been trying... Yeah, sorry.
No, I just was I remember when you first started it, and it was like, oh my god, this is amazing, and we would look at every single post every day, and we would make notes, and we'd be like, oh, we should get in touch with this person, or this person looks like they're doing something really amazing. And then as you were saying, it just was so quick how it grew, and it was just this huge forum of you know, people kind of messaging each other, and then there was like the odd little tiff that would happen sometimes, and it was just like this little kind of thing, and it was just like, okay, I remember messaging you being like, is everything okay? And it's just like, it's okay, it's just like, it's amazing everyone's talking, but it's like, it did become something that was hard to navigate, and I think that was never your intention. And I think, obviously, as you are saying, it's an amazing platform to delve into if you have got the time to go through all of the messages to find, but you know, and it goes to show you that, you know, it's when given a space, again, like what we were talking about, when given a space to express yourselves within a subject, or like a, you know, a form of expression with gender or whatever, with my thing, but you know, it means that those people can come together if they feel like it's a safe space for them to actually kind of like provide information or share information. And I think, you know, you did a great job of sort of initiating that, but I think, you know, I think collectively you can't be left to figure out how to navigate it all by yourself. I think it's about now utilizing this group of people and like, let's build a space to which we can all use to navigate. Maybe it becomes like a website, like a forum website or something that works.
Yeah, so we've been, that's exactly it. So there's some really useful bits of things that pop up, and then obviously because there's 300 people, suddenly there's 400 messages and it gets completely lost. And so then a lot of really useful things get forgotten or lost, or you can't find them again. So we're trying to encourage people to move on to a platform that we've made in collaboration with Fashion Revolution. So if anyone here is interested in that type of fashion or that area of fashion, I really recommend that you look into Fashion Revolution. They're an amazing organisation. They have incredible zines that you can download or you can purchase, which are full of fascinating and really useful, practical knowledge and statistics, and really interesting groups and organizations you can get in touch with. So they're kind of hosting like an online forum on their website for us, so it's a kind of Fashion on Earth forum. So yeah, we're trying to kind of encourage people to use that just so that the really useful information that's on there is public and readily available for everyone. I mean, I had no idea that there would ever be anyone more than just like me and Charles in there. Suddenly all these incredibly knowledgeable people with like amazing scientific papers that they're sharing that just go completely over my head. But in a way, what I kind of see it as, I mean, it's something I kind of started, but I have no, you know, I've never tried to like control it or shape it or make it anything. It's just, you know, it belongs to everybody.
Just open the door.
Yeah, it's just a kind of a space. But yeah, it's kind of, I kind of see it as like a pro bono kind of thing. So it's like all these people with all this incredibly valuable knowledge just kind of giving it away to everyone, because it's really knowledge that everybody needs to have, because it's knowledge that will help us mitigate negative effects on our environment and on our ecosystem. So yeah, so it does really need to be opened up into a public realm so everyone can benefit from it, really.
And I think that's definitely down to the scale in which that's grown to this kind of enormous forum full of loads of people who have loads of knowledge, and like you said, it's still a bit closed. But I guess there is something still really valuable if we go back to the really kind of simple, getting Charles to give you his offcuts to stuff a jacket. Like, there is something that's really valuable in like looking to your local networks and your local community and connecting with them to solve problems on that kind of scale as well.
Yeah. So whenever I'm teaching or I'm doing a lecture and I'm, you know, talking about your network or the people around you, your locality, and I always, you know, try and, you know, I was really expecting it. We would talk in this space, and then, you know, other people would make their own spaces and they would talk. But actually everyone just wants to be in that one space. But I think, you know, whenever you're in a room of people, if you look to your left or your right, you know, there's so many solutions and ideas held in every one of us. And the more we can connect and share those and spread them and encourage them, you know, there is so much power in knowledge and in solutions, and solutions are really what we need at the moment.
Totally. I think, you know, that word localization, I think, is like a key word here, in terms of like, you know, a more dynamic and direct way to kind of finding solutions. It is like, you know, looking around you and seeing what people are doing within your local community, whether it is, you know, maybe online or actually physically where you are. I think, you know, being in London, we're lucky that, you know, within like maybe a square mile of where we are, there's probably many different diverse voices that can assist into any sort of like matter that we put out there to solve. But, you know, in places that, you know, are remoter areas, maybe like in Scotland and little villages and things like that, you know, back in the day, it was such a normal thing for people to kind of like become more of a community and sort of like fight all the planet. And I think it's, you know, it's along with things like sustainability, you know, even just like things like government, like the idea of having a centralized government doesn't solve anything. It's always about localization. And like, obviously things like COVID, we're really starting to realize the power in all of that. And I think that, you know, it's so important for so many factors. I think, you know, finding like-minded people within a local area, that this group, the fashion group that you made, the sustainability group that you made, that, you know, if they had the different pockets and groups that they could all kind of react to, I think that would be a better way for it to be utilized. Because also, like, you know, when it's a smaller group, you're more inclined, instead of just performing or shouting or screaming, you actually can face somebody directly, and you have to kind of engage with that person and figure it out. So
yeah, and I think, you know, not everyone's comfortable, you know, if there's 300 people in a group, not everyone feels confident enough to speak in front of 300 people. But maybe if it's a smaller, you know, there's just 4 or 5 of you, then people, so I feel like the more introverted members of the group aren't so inclined to ask for help. You know, I feel very nervous and self-conscious asking or, you know, requesting for some help in there at the moment. So I think, yeah, there is definitely needs to evolve into something that's a bit more efficient now that it's got so many people that are excited about it.
Definitely. Well, one of the things I was going to say is, like, you know, with teaching, because we both teach a lot, and we gain a hell of a lot from it.
Sometimes, actually, I realize. But some of
I think one of the trends that I'm sort of noticing in a lot of students is, like, you know, they're all of their work, they want to come from a sustainable angle. You know, that everyone's so hungry in the new generation to make work that is coming from a sustainable place. Like, I just taught at St Martin's, and we did a crit with the second years, and, you know, like literally like 90% of them all promoted and produce work that was coming from a sustainable place. And, you know, it's just so refreshing to think about when we were doing work back in the day. It was just from completely different. Like, I think we did like a vintage project where we reworked a vintage item, but never to this scale. And it's just so refreshing, because that's what, you know, in the next 10 years, you'll be seeing more and more designers creating collections that come from that space.
Yeah. And that's what's so exciting, is that designers have got so much power. You know, they have a real skill to contribute. You know, designers are solution finders. That's what we do. We take nothing and we make something. And, you know, we've never needed more solutions than we do now. And the more creative mind, whether that's, you know, within climate science or within, you know, carbon sequestration on farming or whatever, you know, the more creative minds, or whether it's within fashion design or product design that are working on this, the more imagination we have working towards this, the better. So it's really exciting to see that the next generation do see it as part of their general practice, and not just part of like a separate project that they're set.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see like what the next generation kind of come up with to kind of provide solutions for us, because that's the future.
Totally. People don't want to be celebrities anymore. They want to be like sustainability warriors. That's the kind of like that I want to see. No more Kim Kardashian.
I think this is a good time to go to some questions. We've had a few come in, and I've got a few for each of you, and then some for both of you. So I'm just going to kind of field them out as we go, if that's all right. I think this is for both of you, which is, how do you find fabrics, and does it take a long time to search for one that fits your vision?
I'll start, I guess. I mean, we do, I think one thing we're starting to realize is that our brand is being known for our textiles because of the nature of like the output that comes from me. So obviously do a lot of artwork, a lot of pattern design, and obviously tartans now is something that we are really known for. You know, it's one of the challenges is that obviously we want that's what the market wants from us. But to do it in a sustainable way is something that we are finding, you know, challenging each season, and trying to make it in a way that also fits the price point. So, you know, it can be very difficult to tick all of those boxes, and, you know, yet there's still that ticking time clock that the fashion industry puts on us to kind of get the work ready within a certain sales window. So those are the challenges that we sometimes find are solutions to be able to make as many kind of custom things as possible that, you know, we can still reuse. But one of the benefits of it is that then all of the fabrics that we have that have our sort of liquor paint for it, we can keep and we can reuse because they're all our own fabrics. It's not like it's going to go out of season or whatever. They're pieces of artwork, you know, they're cuttings of artwork, and so everything is valid. Like even samples that we have from different factories that send to us to check, we keep them because then we turn them into toys. You know, they're all things that we can reuse. And I think, you know, it can be difficult sometimes. I mean, obviously this is me talking of a brand that has contacts now, but back when I was a student, I was super into like just messaging, you know, factories being like, can you give me your offcuts, please? For my final collection, I didn't pay for a single scrap of fabric. I got all my fabrics for free because I just asked if anyone had any offcuts, and I was able to kind of make something work for that. And the same with my MA as well, you know, it's about reusing things. So I think if you can't maybe have access to fabrics, you know, maybe there's a way of you can making fabrics using kind of old vintage things or reworking stuff like that. You know, people are really hungry for solutions based on that. Right.
Yeah.
I think I've got a question for Phoebe, unless you want to jump in on that one.
No, go ahead.
Go for it. There's a question around the limitations of the types of designs when it comes to zero waste pattern cutting. Like, can you make a tailored suit with this method?
Yeah, of course. I get this question a lot because I think people think, when I'm teaching specifically, people often at the end are like, but it just means there's so many things you can't do. And then I'm always like, but it also means there's so many things you can do. It's really about seeing it as like an opportunity. It's really like addictive when you get into it. It's really exciting because it's like kind of, I mean, I don't do anything to do with numbers because I just see them as a pattern rather than as information. But I can imagine that like it's a similar feeling you get like when you complete something like a Sudoku or like a crossword or like a computer game, which I've never played myself. But you know, it's like this kind of really satisfying thing when you kind of, it all fits together and it works, and you know, and then you've got to figure out the grading, blah blah, and that's like a whole other complicated thing. But if you're studying and you're a student, you know, you don't have to worry about those things now. But it does get really addictive, and you know, tailoring doesn't need to look exactly how it traditionally always looks, you know, like there's no limitations on these things. You know, you can take these things as far as you like. I mean, look at Charles's work, you know, just beautiful. And you don't have to limit yourself with what you think a traditional tailoring technique would be. You could reinvent your own version of that, you know. So and maybe you can't, if you wanted to keep like a traditional like sleeve head shape, maybe the rest of it is, you know, done with something like a less waste pattern cutting where you're kind of reducing it down as much as you can rather than a complete, you know, you can kind of work out how far you want to go with the purity of these things. And maybe, you know, you have some offcuts and you do them as like an applique rather than as a structural thing, or maybe you re-keep those scraps and you remake them as like Charles does into different items, different toys and stuff, or with us we make them into textiles. So you know, the possibilities are endless. You know, I'm always really optimistic about this because I think people kind of sometimes see it as like a rules, like these are the rules and you can't do this and you can't do that, but actually there's so much. Just like think how much you can do just on a piece of paper. Like if you see like a piece of paper, like there's endless things you can do with it. And it doesn't always involve just cutting a neck hole and cutting an armhole and like throwing those scraps into landfill. You know, it's about like thinking about it in a different way, like taking a different solution-based path and just like putting a different pair of glasses on and looking at it in a different way.
Yes, I think there's definitely something to be said for introducing constraints that can actually make you become more creative in your thinking.
It just produces a new item. It's like it's just newness, and that's what everyone's wanting from fashion is newness. Like tailoring and tailored jackets were created out of a need, a functional need, and also like a political need, you know. And so this is a completely new need that is you're
exactly.
facilitating, and you know, you could make the new thing that's potentially a jacket. You know, jackets have been translated through history and they've looked different through history because of certain social political reasons, and you know, this is a very firm example of what that, you know, is a thing to react to. So,
and every design generation is responding to the thing within their time, and this is what we've inherited at this time. This is what we have. Like, we don't have infinite resources, we have planetary boundaries, and we're beginning to understand that, and we're also beginning to see the implications of trying to work beyond those. So, you know, that is the defining thing of our era and of our generation, and that will feed into design. And it is the job of designers to respond to the times that they live in the ways that they work and the products that they produce.
I think
so I always feel really optimistic about all of the possibilities.
Same.
Rather than, because I actually find it easier to work with some of those limitations. I'm like, okay, well, I can't do that, so I'll do it. You know, it makes a framework in a way. But then, you know, everyone works in a different way. Like, find your own way of working. There's no rules. This is how I work. Charles works in a different way. You know, Molly works in a different way. Cray works in design is unique to every designer. So you have to like find your own kind of framework and your own ethos and your own way of doing it. But that's just the way that I work.
I think that that opens us up to another question that's just been asked, which is kind of thinking about responding to the times we're in. How has the impact of COVID affected both of you as designers in a positive way?
Oh, it's really hard. It's so hard.
What's been positive, everyone?
I think for me, it's been like, I've just realised I'm being so grateful for my team, you know, like, and the how scrappy we are. Like, we're so small, and like the fact that we were able to kind of get through this and still work with each other and support each other. Again, it's just kind of pertaining to that idea of community. Like, I'm just so grateful that I've got them. They're like amazing. They're like family to me. And I think that, you know, through a time like this, that's what you need. You need people to kind of support you and stuff. And I think in terms of how that's impacted my work, it goes to show that we don't necessarily need to do like a huge show or a huge collection to try and keep up with the Joneses that the fashion industry always does. It's like, no, it's actually made me realize, like, again, the word authenticity. I could do 3 garments and it would still be completely valid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, literally. And people will still love me the same that they love me because of because we care about them. It's an exchange. I think you don't need to keep up with the Joneses. I'm not Dior. I don't need to be Dior, excuse me. There's no need for me to try and be like that.
Shall I answer that question?
Yeah.
So how has COVID affected me in a positive way? Well, I was really, again, as Charles said, I was beyond bereft to be separated from my team. I live next door to the studio, so I was still going in to run the scrub organisation that we did over lockdown. So it was just me and the mannequins, and I really, really missed them.
Oh my God. Me and the mannequins.
Yeah, I don't know how I think I've been more fragile, but also more resilient than I thought.
You've been so resilient, so strong, doing what you've been doing.
I feel relieved that, to have discovered that about myself, I think. Even though it's not like it being easy at all, like being a small business is very hard. I'm sure there's lots of people listening to this talk that understand that, you know, like you have the weight of the responsibility of like taking care of your work family and like having their best interests and, you know, protecting them and caring for them is, you know, that's a huge weight when there's so much uncertainty. But I guess what I've learned is when shit gets bad, when things get bad, you just have to love harder. And that's something I knew, but I think through this year it's like been a kind of something I've had to, you know, be in. And I think learning to keep loving harder on a daily basis has been something that's been a positive thing to learn.
That's a good name for a collection, Phoebe. Love harder.
Yeah, just keep loving harder. And like by loving, I mean like action, you know, compassion, imagination, kindness, patience, energy, you know, all those good things, you know, just keep doing it harder, you know, survival. Yeah, love harder. I wrote it in my sketchbook in capitals.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's so nice.
I think that's probably a really lovely place to come to a close, actually, because we're just about on time. Thank you both so much. That was such a wonderful conversation, full of so much joy, full of some really wonderful insights into kind of how you're addressing some of these issues in your practice and how it's impacting you. I think it was lovely to have you both.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having us, and thank you everyone watching. I think my mum said hi. Hi, Mum. If
she did say hi right at the beginning, Charles.
Hi, Charles.
Hi, Mum. Love it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Such a treat to see Charles. I miss him.
I know, I miss you too. Hug through the camera. Thank you so much, guys.
Great. If you guys want to just turn your audio and video off, we will end the event. Thanks everyone for coming. We've got lots of